My guest on Legends is a very special person. His name is Stu Apte. And if you don't know who Stu Apte is, then you're really out of touch with the fishing world. Stu is not only an incredible caster and tarpon fisherman, fly tyer, he's a pilot, and he's an icon in the industry. Some of his early shows and work with American sportsmen are legendary. And I welcome to this segment of Legends.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Yes. Something that I always wanted to know about is, in the early days of American Sportsmen, how did they come to you to do this? I mean, I know you were a guide in the Keys, but...
Well, 1961, I was fishing Joe Brooks. And Joe Brooks was the angling editor of Outdoor Life magazine. He was the fishing expert for ABC. And we did a full hour with ABC's Wide World of Sports. And they shot so much great footage. It was actually a fly rod tarpon tournament between Joe Brooks and Al McLean, A.J. McLean.
A.J. McLean.
Sure,
Wow.
who was the angling editor of Field and Stream. And Kirk Gowdy did the introduction. Matter of fact, Roone Arledge, who at that time was president of ABC Sports, became president of all of ABC later. Roone was down at my house. We were operating right from my house. Well,
Isla Morada, right?
No.
Where
This was on Little Torch Key.
Little Torch Key.
28 miles north of Key West, just the next key below Big Pine. And no, I started guiding down there back in the mid-50s and worked up a little bit of a reputation. But Joe Brooks was my mentor from back in the 40s. And so it was only natural that I would take him fishing when he was available and I was available. And he set the world record for tarpon on 12-pound tippet, which was the heaviest we ever used back then, with a 148.5-pounder in 1961.
Is that where you got the tarpon fever bug? Was about that time?
No, I had
you had that before you met Joe?
I had it before, that's right. Well, not before I met Joe, because I started fishing with Joe in 1947 when I was 17 years old.
Wow.
And Joe at that time was the manager of the Metropolitan Miami Fishing Tournament.
That's right.
And I had won some divisions, and I had set a Met record for Jack Crevel on fly at the time, and when I was 17.
Wow.
And Joe gave the presentation, you know, the winning things and all.
Sure.
And we hit it off. We started fishing together. Well, when I graduated college, I went into the Navy. And
that's where the pilot thing happened?
I was a fighter pilot during Korea. Got out in December of '55. Went to work for Pan Am, spent 2 years on probation, got laid off, and became a fishing guide in the Keys.
That's incredible.
So that's how that happened. Then in 1961, Joe set that world record. Well, 1962, they decided to do a full hour with Wide World of Sports on this tournament between Al McLean and Joe Brooks. The other guide was Jimmy Albright, who, when I grew up, coming in the Keys, yes, he was my idol. When I would drive through Almirada, I mean, I'd crane my neck back and forth trying to see him. Because the things that he did.
He just passed away.
Yes, he did. He just passed away with cancer. And anyway, they shot so much great footage in that tournament, which Joe won handily going away. They even extended it for a couple more days of fishing, and we just caught more fish. But they shot so much great footage that they wanted to come back the following year and do a new opening, a little bit in the middle, and a new closing, and have that as the pilot film.
Still an hour?
ABC's, no, that was a half hour.
That was a half hour.
Yep, for ABC's American Sportsman Show. And I was involved with them from that point on.
Because I know you took Flip with you sometimes, right?
Well, I did Flip, took Flip down to Costa Rica, doing a show where Dick Butkus.
He told me some funny stories we can't talk about
here.
That's right.
But yeah, it's true.
So from that point, after the American Sportsman experience, you had your own show there for a while. I saw some of it. It was absolutely beautifully filmed, and it was just, and it was called On the Fly, wasn't it?
That's right. Well, that was some year, that was only a few years back.
Oh, that was in the 70s, or when was that?
No, in the 80s.
80s?
Matter of fact, in the early 90s.
Oh, really?
Yep, early 90s. And it was on ESPN. And now they're re-showing it, I guess, on the Outdoor Life channel.
Oh, fantastic.
So, no, I did
But I saw some earlier footage too that you did back in the 70s, and
Well,
with some
that was
pretty well-known people. And Flips used some of the footage
sure.
too.
Yeah, I did. I produced not a show, but a video. Back then, it was a film for Evinrude Motors called Tarpon Country.
Oh, I see.
And that was in 1976, and it won the Teddy Award that year for being the best fishing film produced.
It was really nice.
And then the one that I did in '93, not too many years ago, or '94, whatever it was, Quest for Giant Tarpon, won the Teddy Award for that year also.
Yeah. Now let's talk about fly tying. You're a guy down there. Is that how you got introduced to? So I'm going to tie my own flies.
No,
how did that happen?
No. I started tying flies when I was a freshman in college at the University of Miami in 1948.
Gosh, we're all University of Miami people. That's great.
I had more bonefish flies on the market in the South Florida area than all the rest of the companies combined. There weren't a lot of them back then.
No.
And I didn't even have a fly tying vise. I tied on a regular old Sears and Roebuck vise in my garage.
Incredible.
And I had a couple of other young guys that I taught tying with me, tying for me.
That's incredible. Because I know your tarpon flies they're really legendary. I mean, they are. And you still experiment with all that today,
Oh,
don't
yeah.
you?
Whenever I find time, it gets more and more difficult to find time.
Are you in the hunt still for a world record?
No.
No?
No,
'Cause I saw some footage of you fighting some monstrous type
Well,
tarpon.
I actually caught a tarpon 2 years ago down in the lower Keys, back in my old haunts near Little Torch Key. Took a friend of mine, Joe Robinson, down there. He wanted to go down. We went down for 1 day, and I actually caught a fish that Joe had the world record on 15-pound tippet with a 180-pounder, which he has mounted. And we both know and agree that this fish was considerably bigger than that, only it was on 12-pound tippet.
Wow.
And don't know if it was 200 pounds, but I don't have a tag. I've never gotten a tag. I don't intend to kill another one.
Right.
It's not my cup of tea anymore, so it doesn't make any difference. I know that fish was a world record. And that's all it, I know it myself, and that's all
You
that
know
matters.
that's all that matters, really. I once fished with Ralph Delph, and he told me some stories. Didn't he fish with you a couple of times?
Oh, no. A lot of times. Yeah, Ralph and I...
he talked very highly of you. He said, if you want to talk about going in a boat with a real angler, and Stu's the guy.
Well, I got Ralph to give up his job as a structural engineer and become a guide.
Yes.
Because that's what his love was. And
he told me about the story of where you hooked a dinosaur tarpon and he jumped overboard to try to get it for you.
No, not quite.
That's not the story. Oh, good. Tell me the story.
This was at Homosassa, and it was like 1982. And I had hooked this. There was a daisy chain of fish, and there was only one other boat in that area. We went up to another little area. Steve Huff, who is probably the best backcountry guide in the world, was up in that area. Steve and I always shared information. And so he called me and said that there's some big fish up here. Why don't you come on up? And I knew where he went. We found this daisy chain of fish going around counterclockwise, and they were all big fish. But there was one really big fish in there. So Ralph pulled me up to him, and I dropped the fly in the center of the donut of the chain, waited for that big one to come around, and started working the fly. Well, instead of that one getting it, some little upstart 140, 150 pounder took the fly, and I wouldn't set the hook, but it felt something, and it blew the fly out and kind of made a motion, and the chain broke up and moved off about 100 yards. And they chained up again. Ralph pulled me back over to him, and now they're going in the other direction, clockwise. I dropped the fly in the center of the donut again, and waited for this monster to come by and work the fly, and she wasn't going to let an upstart get it this time. I mean, she just engulfed it. I banged it real good, cleared the line, and that fish came out of the water like a Polaris missile. Had to be 8 feet long. I mean, oh yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it was a monster. Well, 48 minutes into the fight, that was the only jump it made the whole time.
And it stayed down.
This is all on 12-pound tippet, which is what I fished.
That's incredible.
48 minutes into the fight, we get the fishing boat together, and I said, Ralph, I've got this fish program that every time it comes up to take some air, I really pull down on it and I make it fight to come up.
Right.
I said, this time you get in the boat, right inside the cockpit, and when it goes to roll, instead of pulling it down, I'm going to pull it up, and you'll get your shot. So Ralph reaches across its back, right next to the boat,
right,
and sticks it with the gaff, and just about that quick, Ralph's out of the boat. Fish jerked him right out of the boat, and he's a big guy.
Yeah.
He's strong.
Yeah, he's strong.
And he's holding onto the side of the boat, got the fish, and he hands me the gaff in one hand. The fish is still on it. I've got the rod in my other hand, still hooked to the fish. And while Ralph is getting in, the fish rips off the gaff and swims off. I've still got it hooked. Well, the gaff that Ralph was using had too narrow a bite. It had a long point, but only a bite like this.
Oh, I see.
Now, and that fish was that wide across the back. And I had a gaff in there my gaff, which had a barb, and it had a great big bite, would have been perfect.
Perfect.
I said, Ralph, if we get another shot, please use my gaff. He said, Ralph? He said, no, I've gaffed a lot of tarpon with this.
He's definitely an opinionated guy.
He said, I'll get him with this. I said, well, okay, it's your boat. We get the fish and boat together again the same way about 15 minutes later, and it didn't want to do it again.
No.
Well, same thing happened. Ralph reached over and stuck him with his gaff. He's out of the boat. Fish swims off with him.
Second time?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Fish swims off with him about 50 yards, and Ralph has and now we're in about 8 feet of water. Ralph's got his legs wrapped around the fish, and he's all hugging it. And later he told me he was trying to hold that little gaff in it.
Oh,
see? And the fish comes up and jumps, and Ralph looked like a flea on an elephant.
Yeah, I bet.
And I thought that he was in trouble wrestling around like that in deep water. So I had a big release gaff in the boat, and we were in his boat. So I started the engine, ran up to where he was, and put it in reverse, and put it what I thought was back in neutral, and ran up. I was going to hook the fish with that big gaff up under here, and we'd have him.
Right.
Well, we were not in neutral. It was still in forward gear. So I had to run back, throw it into hard reverse, turn the key off, and the forward motion of the boat still came right up on Ralph. He had to take one hand off of the fish, fend the stem of the boat off, and it rolled him under, and the fish got off the gaff and swam away.
What an incredible story.
Well, we didn't talk about that fish. All Ralph said is, why did you run me over? I said, Ralph, I thought you were in trouble, and I thought, I was doing the right thing. So we didn't talk about that fish the rest of that day, that night, or the next day fishing. The next evening at supper, we're in a restaurant, and Ralph says, I've been thinking about that. What do you think that fish weighed, Stu? I said, well, I'll tell you. You've seen as many of these big fish probably as I have. And I took a paper napkin, tore it in half. I said, you write down what you think it weighed. I'll write down what I think it weighed, so we don't influence each other.
Right.
And I wrote down 230 PLUS. And he wrote down 230 and a plus sign.
Incredible.
So, it was a great big fish, I'll tell you that.
What a story. What an incredible story. Let's talk about fly rods. Now, this date and time, you're going to go out fishing, and I know it depends on what you're going to go for. What's your standard tarpon setup that you like to use? What weight rod?
Oh,
you tend to go, to use.
If I'm going to go up to Homosassa, excuse me, and really, go for a great big fish, I'm going to use a 12-13.
Are these one-piece rods?
No.
What was the concept of the one-piece rod? Everybody was saying it was a much better... I know you're an expert at this.
Back then it was, because they did not have the technology that they have now. I can put a 3-piece rod in your hand or a 4-piece rod in your hand and a 2-piece of the same exact weight and blank.
Right.
And the only way you can tell the difference is maybe the multi-piece rod has a little more weight to it, very slightly, because of the reinforcing of the ferrules, but the casting would be exactly the same.
That's incredible.
And they are, in theory anyway, just as strong. You can always have something go wrong.
Oh, sure.
Murphy's Law.
Oh, yeah, definitely. What do you think about all this fly? Did you ever think it was going to be this big, that fly fishing?
Oh,
And,
no.
there's not a person I don't meet that they put a fly rod in their boat.
Oh, I know.
Did you think it was going to be like that?
No, I did not. Matter of fact, when I was guiding back in the early 60s, late 50s, there was very few guides in the Keys that would even let a fly fisherman on board.
That's true, yes.
Because if it was too windy, they didn't want to fish, you know, and they wanted to make their day, and they were dangerous.
Yep.
There was one guy.
Flailing flies
yep,
or whatever.
there was one guy down there, Mac McCarthy, been dead a long time, that when he guided Joe Brooks, and Joe was an excellent caster.
Oh, yeah.
Joe used to tell me that he didn't pole the boat. Mac would get out of the boat and hunker down low and push the boat.
That's incredible.
For him.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
He get out. That's how he would.
Because he was concerned about the fly.
Fly getting hooked.
But I was hooked 6 times in one day by an angler back in the early 60s.
Well, that must have been a nice
With tarpon
day.
flies, yeah.
Oh boy. That must
And he was a
hurt.
good angler. He was a good caster until he saw a tarpon.
And he just loses
the whole
it.
boat would vibrate.
It's incredible.
He was a pretty big guy. He did a lot of Atlantic salmon fishing, and he was an attorney that practiced only before the Supreme Court in Washington.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, really a guy of stature.
Right.
But boy, he'd lose it all when he saw a tarpon.
How about Ted Williams? Did you ever fish Ted?
Oh,
very
Ted and
much?
I started fishing together back in 1948.
Mm-hmm. Two pilots.
Well,
He was a
no,
Marine pilot, wasn't
yep,
he?
he was. But we met out the Tamiami Trail.
Oh, that's
And
yeah.
he was
that's our
fishing.
neck of the woods.
He was fishing snook, as I was, and I was 18 years old. And you know, we just started talking. It was obvious he was a hell of a good fisherman, fly fisherman. And so I said, well, you know, this morning early I had found a bunch of really big snook in an area in the Marco Canal.
Right.
And he was staying at Weaver Camp. I was sleeping in my 1941 DeSoto.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and with the mosquitoes and all.
Right.
And so we made it up. The next morning, I would meet him at Weaver's camp, and I would take him. We'd go in 2 cars. He had a station wagon. And I'd take him down to this place where the big snook were cruising.
Right.
And I only knew his name was Ted. My name was Stu. And the end of our fishing part of the day, you know, he gave me his phone number, and I gave him mine. And, yeah, let's get together sometime. I didn't know who he was. Didn't know he was the baseball star.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I wasn't a baseball fan.
No, so you.
And one day I came home from the University of Miami, and my mother said, this guy, Ted Williams, has been calling you. He's called about 4 or 5 times today, and he seems a little agitated the last couple of calls that, you know, he wants to talk with you. I said, I don't know any Ted Williams. And my mother said, well, he had fished with you for snook. I said, oh, that must be this big guy, Ted.
Ted.
So he had a home in Coral Gables at the time. He was with his first wife. So I called him, and we got together, and we fished together ever since.
That's
So
incredible.
we fished together down in Little Torch Key when I was guiding. Matter of fact, his contract with Sears and Roebuck when he was their fishing expert and all the
and
tackle.
all the tackle, and even weights, and they had everything.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well,
Ted Williams, yeah.
His contract with them was signed in my house on Little Torch Key.
Wow, there's a little bit of history there.
Yeah, they came down, and then the next day we went out and shot a bonefish film.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, I know you got to go. I just want to tell you, the first book I ever bought with fishing when I was a young guy growing up in Hollywood, Florida, okay, was Stu Apte's fishing book, the little small...
Fishing in the Florida
I
Keys.
still have that book. And I'll tell you what, the charts and the explanations, the shots, it really was kind of ahead of its time in a way, you know? I mean, it was kind of from a very good guide's point of view, and if you wanted to know anything about fishing, and that type of fishing, because it was tended to be on the light tackle side, especially that shot of you with the permit and the shallows standing on the front. I'll never forget it. That was my first real book that I
Well, I tried to do that book so that people that came down to the Florida Keys that really could not afford to go out with a guide could go out by themselves and catch fish.
Yes.
And rig properly, know where to go for the different species. And I didn't, of course, tell all. But
no, of course not. What world records are still standing? Any of them?
Oh, sure.
Because you had quite a few.
Yeah, I've had more than 44.
44 world records.
Not all fly. There are some IGFA light tackle and ISFA. Well, I know that the longest standing saltwater fly rod record which is still standing, is one. That's a dolphin, 58 pounds on 12-pound tippet from 1964. And then my sailfish, which is 136 pounds on 12-pound tippet, 1965. And I just found out from Doug Kelly, who's editor of Sport Fishing magazine, I did a feature story for him in the June issue on taming the triple-digit tarpon. And Doug found out that my tarpon record on 6-pound class tippet is the longest still standing tarpon record on fly, and that's 82.5 pounds.
Unbelievable. Well, it's really been an honor for me to have you on the show, and I really appreciate it, and thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I thank you very much.